Let's say a very good morning, though, to Jonathan Gullis, Conservative MP for Stoke-on-Trent North, of course, because he is the man who speaks an awful lot of sense. And there's not a lot of that going on, as you well know. Jonathan, very good morning to you. Welcome.
Well, hello, Mike, and you're entirely right. I think all civil servants should have to tune in to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham, so a dose of common sense to get rid of the Channel 4 that's been ringing in their ears the night before.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, I've got some bad news for them all as well, because working from home apparently makes you munch through an extra 800 calories a day, according to a survey I've got here. 3,500 fewer steps on average when you work from home and don't actually bother going to an office. So, you know, the revolution is over as far as I'm concerned for that. But let's talk about Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary. She's going to be saying later on today in America that there are as many as 780 million people who could qualify to claim asylum in the UK. I think she's absolutely right. She said this similar sort of number a while ago, and people were sort of roundly critical of her and were almost ridiculing her for saying, oh, of course a billion people aren't going to come to Britain. Well, I can tell you, Jonathan, I've been saying it this morning, there are people coming into Mexico now from sub-Saharan Africa, and they're flooding into the United States of America because they can. And there's a very big problem here for the West, it seems to me. Western Europe, one, but also the US and A. Because if the US is getting people coming from Africa, it's obviously being very well organised, isn't it?
Well, first of all, isn't it great to have a politician, a frontline politician as well, who's got the bravery of their convictions and their beliefs to stand up and say what they think. The British public are crying out for this, and unlike Sir Keir Starmer, who constantly dodges and ducks and dives at every opportunity, and then seemingly seems to say that the Times newspaper were not telling the truth when he was actually clearly signing up to an EU quota sharing scheme. It's great that Suella has the belief, and I hope every colleague, because you know, sadly, Mike, there's always a few wets in the Tory party that sometimes need to, I'm sure we'll brief, you know, without their name being used, to The Guardian. But I hope that every colleague and the Prime Minister will rally behind what Suella's got to say, because she's bang on the money. You know, this asylum shopping, and it is asylum shopping, there's no other word for it, is taking place. It's completely unacceptable. It goes against the idea of claiming asylum. You know, Baroness Scotland, the former Labour minister, used to say that you should claim asylum in the first safe country that you get to. We've got the Prime Minister making it clear that you do not need to leave mainland France in order to come to this country because you're already in a UN founding, NATO signatory country. So why on earth do you need to flee from France at the end of the day? And as you say, it's very concerning to see mass migration all across the continent now taking place. And I just hope that the British public feel the difference as and when I believe that we'll win that court case with Rwanda and on Rwanda, and we can get those planes off the ground and over there to send a real signal to the smuggling gangs. But you are right, it can easily let people feel there is something wider going on here when it's coming on those numbers that we're seeing. Very worrying indeed.
Yeah, exactly right. And a caller to Julie Hartley-Brewer's show this morning made a good point. He said, you know, it's all very well saying these people are coming here illegally, but we are actually helping them to do so because inevitably, you know, Border Force is picking them up in the sea, or the RNLI is picking them up in the sea. They're bringing them to this country. Many of them are not actually, you know, just touching the shores and then they're here. Many of them are sort of being picked up in British waters and sometimes in French waters before they've actually got here. And then once they are here, they're sort of, you know, fed and watered and given somewhere to stay, sometimes for years on end. So, you know, I'm not being critical of the government doing that, but it is an interesting argument.
Well, look, what we're seeing is a big difference, aren't we, in Belgium and in France. In Belgium, they're actually being proactive and making sure that boats are not being deployed from their shores, but also being taken back to Belgian soil. So we've seen a dramatic drop in the amount of attempts for people to cross the channel from Belgium. But in France, Monsieur Macron is more interested in having cosy photos with Sir Keir Starmer than he is in actually trying to stop the boats. And ultimately, is happy to profiteer off the great British taxpayer rather than actually deliver on the promises that he supposedly has made to us. I just think that France has got so much to do. And like you say, the fact that when that boat was sinking deep in French territorial waters, it was the British who went and rescued those, whilst the French idly stood by and watch that happen. That is completely unacceptable. And the fact that the international community haven't condemned France, but condemned the United Kingdom for wanting to look at Rwanda, tells you everything you need to know about the virtue signalling Wokerati that sadly infected global institutions and NGOs around the world today. You know, I just think it's telling us that ultimately, as you say, we need to make sure that we send it clear. If we're picking people up, we should be taking them back to France. If the French don't like that and they want to get into some sort of standoff, then we should have that standoff. We shouldn't be afraid to make a very clear signal of intent to the French authorities. We've given you nearly £750 million over the last 5 to 8 years to stop boats, or in some cases stop the lorries. We've put infrastructure that's used taxpayer money on your side of the border. We are the ones patrolling the waters. You are simply just standing by and partying, as the Express pointed out, on the British taxpayer dime, and happily helping, it looks like in some cases, small boats launch, and we simply won't take it anymore.
No, and it's interesting, isn't it, that the French are actually beginning to wake up to their own problem as well, because they're now patrolling the southern border with Italy far closer than they've ever done, because it used to be there was no border there at all. Because looking at all the people coming to Lampedusa, that island off the coast of Sicily in Italy, is the first port of call for thousands of people. I think they had 8,000 people practically in one day. And there's only 6,000 people living there. They're now stopping people coming in from Italy. The Germans have also said to Italy that they're not going to take any more refugees from that country. So the EU and Europe is sort of waking up to this problem as well.
About time too. I mean, what's happening in Lampedusa is absolutely petrifying, to be perfectly frank, for not just that population, where obviously they're now dramatically outnumbered, but also for the fact that this clearly shows the driven intent for people, predominantly young men, as we've seen from all the video footage, with their iPhones, with their Nike trainers, these people who are supposedly fleeing for their lives, Mike. This tells us everything we need to know, which is why I think the Home Secretary has been so bang on with her language, and despite being derided by the Labour Party, who simply want an open border policy with the EU, and who actually want to move our borders from the Channel over to the Mediterranean based on the EU quota sharing scheme they want to sign us up to, tells us all we need to know that in this country, whilst I accept that not everyone will be in love with the Conservative Party at this moment in time, they want to see more delivery and less talk. I fully understand that. The alternative is a Labour Party propped up by a Liberal Democrat Party who are desperate to rejoin the European Union, who simply will sell out the British public and obviously have amnesty through the back door in all but name, in order to effectively allow the smugglers to carry on doing what they're doing, which is making the UK a destination of choice, as if it's some sort of holiday idea where people have a right to choose. Christian Wokeford, who used to be a Conservative, obviously a bit of a twerp in joining the Labour Party, said this was asylum shopping. I wonder if he still agrees with that view now, or has he somehow been on some sort of journey that the left-wingers love to tell us about so much? Yeah,
and they really do, don't they? Because we've obtained some exclusive footage, Jonathan, actually, of some of those people in the Labour Party who want to rejoin the European Union. Have a look at this. I mean, there are no words, really, are there, Jonathan?
Well, no, look, I will say one thing. The synchronisation was quite impressive. I mean, it's quite tragic that people have spent that much time practising, clearly, and rehearsing. And I'm sure that if they were on Strictly Come Dancing, you'd have to give them some points for that. But in terms of actual, interest and the costume choice as well, would mean that I'd only give it a 1, personally. I'm sure Sir Keir Starmer will give it a 10. Because these are his buddies. His Brussels-loving buddies. But
I mean, poor old Keir Starmer, he goes over to Europe, right, like some kind of, Tony Blair muppet, decides that he's going to try and impress everybody with his incredible international acumen, gets to The Hague, nobody knows why he's there, then does a deal supposedly with Emmanuel Macron, who then finds out he can't do that deal because he's not in the EU. So he comes back, and immediately the only policy he's actually decided to make on migrants turns out to be something he can't do.
Well, it tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it, Mike, about the Labour Party, that the first time they've actually put some detail on the table, it instantly falls apart. And ultimately, these are the people that want to govern our country. I mean, whilst I say that the Conservative Party have got a lot to do to repair trust with the British public, I'm not blind to that. I'm not saying everything's perfect. We've got to deliver in order to get people to want to vote for us. But the alternative is absolutely dire and dismal. And I'm sure the British public overall are feeling quite apathetic at this moment in time. And whilst I believe that the Prime Minister, as you said earlier, is making the right steps on net zero, about time common sense prevailed in this debate. He obviously is going to talk tough about wanting to go further in other areas that we've heard. I think HS2, look, ultimately, this is something that technically would benefit Stoke-on-Trent with part of the Handsacre link. But I do think for many people that I serve, they are looking at this project and the amount of billions that it's going to be projected. And they do think to themselves, if that money went on bus services, if that money went in improving the roads and fixing potholes, that would be a big win overall. And so I think that, you know, if the government is looking to spend money in a different way, then let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the Tory party is still in a position where all is not lost. A bit like, you know, the Champions League final in 2005. You know, Liverpool were losing, getting beaten dramatically, but came back and actually won it. Because we've seen an 8-point bump in the polls for Rishi Sunak after he gave up on that ludicrous net zero idea of cars being done away with if they've got petrol in them by 2030. So, I mean, there's any number of things that he could do to get another 8 points and then another 8 points.
Well, like you say, a flight to Rwanda, I'm sure, will have a surge in the polls, and then Labour will actually have to say, are they still committed to cancelling that policy once the plane gets off the ground? Because ultimately their cover at the moment is to say that, oh, no planes taken off, so this deal doesn't actually work. When we see a flight take off, they'll have to answer that question. We need to do more deals with more safe third countries to get more people out of this country who've arrived here illegally. I think on crime, we need to make sure that neighbourhood policing is actually taking place and hold chief constables and police and crime commissioners to account. And if they're not delivering, then call them out for doing so. We need to make sure, as I say, that if we're not going to continue the whole leg of HS2 to Manchester, that is that money going into improving bus services and fixing potholes, which drive people pottery here in the potteries, Mike, you won't be shocked to know. And then ultimately, we also need to make sure that, you know, we have those very clear dividing lines. And I still believe that you leaving the European Convention of Human Rights is one of those that we should be signing up to, because it's ridiculous how it's delayed us deporting terrorists to other countries, like America, for example, to be investigated for serious crimes. It's obviously being used by these human rights lawyers to prevent us from putting people onto barges or deporting them once they've arrived here illegally. It simply doesn't work in the interest of the United Kingdom. We already have the Human Rights Act. We already have the Equality Act. We have thousands of pieces of case law. We have a Supreme Court that keeps checks and balances on the government. Why on earth do we need a court in Strasbourg as well to tell us what to do?
Yeah, absolutely right. Jonathan, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Jonathan Gullis, Conservative MP for Stoke-on-Trent.